We're about to start the program here, being brought to you by Friends of Public Banking. Folks out there in the lobby and around the table, if I can get your attention, we need people to sit down. We're about to begin to start this program. My name is Miguel Gavilan Molina. I'm with radio station KPFA, your free speech radio station. Thank you so much. And myself and my executive producer, Dennis Bernstein, have tried to bring public radio back into the community where it should be. So we're proud to be here. And I'd like to thank the folks with the public banking group here at Santa Rosa. At this point, I would like to introduce Shelly Browning, who is coordinated and helped organize this event. Please give it up for public banking.
Thanks, Miguel. Thanks, everybody. I knew his voice would catch your attention, so thank you. So I am Shelly Browning. This is my party, and I'd like to thank y'all for coming. This is very exciting, and I've been looking forward to this event for 5 years. You know, I do come from the Occupy movement. That is how I came about looking at, you know, a lot of the problems that we're facing today. You kind of can trace back to the way our banking and finance system is working. And through that movement, I naturally found myself drawn to the people who are speaking about solutions. And of course, you've all heard of Ellen Brown. It's about a lot of what brought you out here tonight. She's our fearless leader in this nationwide movement calling on public banking, and I'll say a little more about that later, but that's what brings me here tonight. I like to say I never left Wall Street. I've been on this. I've been politically active, and that's, you know, what brings me here. The cannabis cash is just a natural segue into, you know, just it's an unbanked industry. And with all its inherent risks, and it's, you know, so it's above ground now, and it's time to bring it all into the light and bank that cash is just a natural marriage, it seems. So I just thank you all for your interest and for being here, for being present. And my hope from this evening is that we collectively educate ourselves as a community, that we have information about another way of doing business, and we collectively work together as a community to decide how to best move forward to meet our needs. So again, thank you for coming. And I did just want to let you know this is being filmed, and it will ultimately be posted on the website publicbanking.org, so you can watch for it there in coming days or weeks. I'm not sure how long it'll be taking to get there, but that's where it will end up. I wanted to acknowledge any elected officials that are in the room. If anybody is currently in office, ran for office. I know, thank you. Efren, where's Gary Waisaki? Is he still here? There's Gary. Anybody else? Efren Carrillo? Anybody else in office? Or Craig Goodman? Brennan, still counting the votes in Sebastopol. So yeah, thanks you guys for being present. Who else? Assemblyman Wood. Assemblyman Wood, thank you for coming. For being present, for serving your communities in a really challenging time. I know it's like tireless work, and thank you for your work and for being here with us. So I wanted to thank the sponsors. First is Commonomics USA, which was founded by Mark Armstrong, who is one of our, well, I've been referring to him the last few days as the man with the plan. He will be presenting tonight, and he founded Commonomics USA. Also, Nationwide Compliance Specialist is Adam. Oh, hi, Adam, all the way to the back. Thank you for being here and for your support. Also, our local brewery, Hen House, donated some beers for the evening. And Mark Gonzalez is my next door neighbor at the back, the guy that I've been calling him the dude with the food. There he is. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I've been working on the computer and yelling out to the window to him, like, how's the food going? Doing it all at once here. And Norgray, who's someone who's worked with us on the public banking cause, has graciously donated to help cover some of the costs. And of course, KPFA, thank you. Miguel Molina, Dennis Bernstein, for being here this evening, but for also being such great support and plugging this event in the last few weeks, and they'll continue to take the stories of tonight and bring them forward, and I'm sure continue to report on those. So we will have a Q&A at the end, and so please just hold any questions or comments until the three speakers have presented. And see if I forgot anything. Oh, yes. But I wanted to say that Dennis Bernstein and Miguel Molina will be leaving on Friday to go to North Dakota, to Standing Rock, to report. Report on the water protectors and their efforts and the actions there. And they're going out of pocket. They're paying their own way to get there and to do this work. And tonight's event was also out of pocket for all of us, so it's our pleasure to do it, to nourish you and nurture you and educate you, and if you feel inspired and want to help donate a little to support the cause, that'd be lovely. So I did make up a couple little boxes. The blue one is for the water, and the green's for the Cannabis Cash and Public Banking event, so pass this. So our first speaker is Omar Figueroa. I'll give you the podium in a second.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
that's for the Q&A there. So
Okay, fantastic.
let me introduce you. Omar Figueroa has been a criminal defense lawyer based in San Francisco since 1998. He has represented criminal defendants in 30 counties across California, including Sonoma, Marin, Mendocino, and in statewide federal courts. He is a member of the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, California Normal, and Cannabis Action Network. Thank you, Omar, for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for joining us here. I have also been in Sebastopol for the past 6 years now, and it is a pleasure to be here with all of you Sonoma County residents and all of you enlightened people who are seeking ways to solve this banking conundrum that is confronting the cannabis industry. First of all, the good news on a macro level is that there has been a wave of legalization across the country. And now the sales and use of recreational cannabis are legal under state law along the entire west coast of the continental United States. And yesterday there was also a strong foothold established in the East Coast. So California, Massachusetts, Maine, and Nevada have now legalized cannabis for adults, joining Colorado, Washington, Alaska, Oregon, and the District of Columbia. And then yesterday, Florida, Montana, Arkansas, and North Dakota, and we'll hear more about North Dakota when it comes to public banking, all approved medical cannabis. So pretty much every state where there was a cannabis legalization proposal, it was successful. And that shows a huge shift in public sentiment. It also means that the wind is at our back. We have the momentum to achieve these changes. There is a way forward. It is viable, and it is very promising. Now in California, Prop 64, about which many of us have misgivings, passed with a pretty solid 55% approval rating. And according to ArcView market research, it's going to be a $1.6 billion industry in the first year of legalization, and a $6 billion industry in California alone by 2020. So the industry is about to explode, and the banking needs are going to explode. Now consider right now what the risks of an all-cash industry are. First of all, we have the risks of robberies and home invasions. And we have seen that in Sonoma County this season, where there's a shooting, and now there's like wanted suspects, and I think this is the whole specter of prohibition that accompanies the people are reluctant to call law enforcement. And so that is a problem that can be solved by having public banking. The other problem, a problem that many of my clients encounter, is the problem of seizure by law enforcement, what we call legal robbery. And that is a pervasive problem, and it happens because people in the legal medical cannabis industry cannot put their dollars in the bank. And I've encountered dozens of cases over the years where the police see money and they'll take it. And if it's more than $25,000, they can keep the money without an underlying criminal conviction. That threshold is being raised to $40,000 starting January 1st, but there's a huge incentive for law enforcement to take money whenever they see it, because there's a good chance they're going to be able to keep it. And if you want to get your money back, you have to basically initiate contested asset forfeiture proceedings and trace the source of your money, and it can be very difficult for people in the medical cannabis industry, especially in light of federal prohibition, to have all of that documentation readily available to trace the source of their funds. So having public banking will help solve this huge problem. And just consider the size of the industry. $1,600 million the first year of legalization. That's next year in California alone. And that's a huge risk to public safety, and that's why it's urgent to have a public banking solution. I think public banking is a very visionary solution to the problem. It will help keep the dollars local. It will allow public banks to give low-interest loans to students, to startups, to small businesses. And right now, consider that the cannabis industry has a hard time acquiring financing from traditional banks. So by having public banking, you could create a thriving cannabis economy in the North Coast and have those dollars stay local and use that money not for enriching Wall Street people who are on the other side of the country, but for growing our local economy and allowing students to have low-interest student loans and maybe loan forgiveness, and allowing small startups and businesses that are cannabis-related that cannot obtain adequate capitalization, allowing them to compete with the big corporations that want to come into Northern California and take over and buy out what many in the cannabis industry have spent a whole lifetime building. So I think public banking could be an incredible solution, and it's something we should all think about, put our energy towards. We can make it happen. The wind is at our backs. And because I want to hear my co-panelists rather than hear myself speak, I am going to be quiet. So thank you for being here.
Thanks, Omar. You got right on up, public banking. That's awesome, thank you. So the next speaker will be Ellen Brown. And Ellen is a former attorney, the founder of the Public Banking Institute, and the author of a dozen books, including the best-selling Web of Debt, which tells the story of the Federal Reserve and the foundations of America's monetary system. Her more recent book, The Public Banking Solution, makes the case for a national network of local and regional public banks. Thank you.
It's great to be here. Thank you very much, Shelley. It's great to see this huge crowd. A lot of support for public banks in the context of cannabis cash. We're living in revolutionary times. One of our first clues was the Brexit vote, which was totally unanticipated, and now we have last night's vote, which was quite unanticipated. So there is a big backlash against the establishment, including the established banks. So it's an auspicious sign for a revolution in banking. So I'm going to talk about why we need publicly owned banks, and then Mark's going to talk about how we could use a public bank in the cannabis context. Next, okay. Globally, 25% of banks are publicly owned. So this is not like a revolutionary concept in the world. In fact, in the 1990s, 40% of banks were publicly owned, but then we had a big push for privatization and liberalization, which means relaxing regulations, which ended in the credit crisis of 2008. So next slide. But in the U.S., we have one publicly owned depository bank, and that's in North Dakota, the Bank of North Dakota. North Dakota is also the only state to have escaped the credit crisis. By the spring of 2009, it was the only state that hadn't slipped into the red. It has, at that time, it had the lowest unemployment rate in the country. It's now third lowest, even after 2 years of oil busts. It's got one of the lowest foreclosure rates and the lowest default rate on credit card debt and on student debt. Next. The Bank of North Dakota was established in 1919. It was actually a farmers' revolt against the big out-of-state banks that were foreclosing on the farmers in North Dakota. They were in a depression then. So they organized a populist movement, formed their own political party called the Non-Partisan League, which I thought was a brilliant name for a party, and won an election and set up their own bank, the Bank of North Dakota. It looks like a move towards socialism, but actually, as we know, North Dakota is a very conservative Republican state. It was actually not about socialism, but about state sovereignty. They wanted to keep their money in the state and leverage it for their own purposes, as Omar was suggesting. The model is that by law, all of the state's revenues are deposited in the bank, and then they leverage that money for public credit. Unlike private banks, it has a mandate to serve the public, so there are certain sectors that they particularly support, which is agriculture, energy, education, and housing, and they do such things as 1% loans to startup farmers and startup businesses, low-interest loans for students, etc. In over a decade, they've had a return on equity of between 17 and 26%, and they returned $40 million dividend to the state every year, although the last couple of years they've actually kept that money as part of their capital base because they've expanded so rapidly that they've needed a larger capital base. But anyway, they've turned a very nice profit, and that's a lot for a state that only has 670,000 people in it. It's a very small state, like the size of a medium-sized city. Next. In November of 2014, the Wall Street Journal came out with an article that said that the Bank of North Dakota is actually more profitable than Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase. So it's actually 70% more profitable than those two big banks. And the author of that article attributed it to oil, but in fact, we've had an oil bust the last 2 years, and yet the Bank of North Dakota has continued to report record profits. They've reported their highest profits ever in December of 2015. So it's not about oil. So then the question is, what is it about? It's actually their business model. They have lower costs. They don't pay bonuses, fees, or commissions. They don't have high-paid CEOs. The highest paid person is the president, who last time I looked was making $270,000 a year. Compare that to Wells Fargo, for example, where the president makes over $20 million a year. So that's a big drain on your profits. And they don't have private shareholders who are sucking the profits out of the company. They don't pay for advertising. They have a built-in deposit or a captive deposit base in the state itself, and they don't have to advertise for borrowers. They don't compete with the local banks, but they actually partner with the local banks. So the local banks act sort of like the front office that goes out and finds the loan, determines creditworthiness, and does all those ordinary banker functions. And then the Bank of North Dakota comes in and helps with capitalization. So they don't have ATMs. They don't have, they've actually formed a second branch now, but it's not like a Wall Street bank that has a bank every few blocks. They don't need a lot of branches because they don't really cater to individuals. They have like about 3% of their depositors are individuals, and all the rest is the state itself. And they only do that because they figured, well, we're a public bank, we probably should be open to the public. They don't make it easy. Next. And it's not just the Bank of North Dakota. There are similar models around the world, and one leading model is the Sparkassen banks of Germany. This is a large network of, they're not exactly publicly owned, they're more like nonprofits. They're not owned by anybody, but they're not privately owned. And they have a mandate to serve the public. And they too came out with a report in 2015 saying that showing that they were more profitable, using Bundesbank figures, than the private commercial banks. Next. So that you can see from this chart that the orange lines are the Sparkassen banks, the publicly owned, or the not privately owned banks. The baby blue lines are the commercial banks. So the commercial banks did reasonably well before the crisis, and then they plunged. So it's a very risky model, and they really haven't recovered from that. Whereas you can see that the orange has always been profitable, and lately exceptionally profitable. Also profitable are the green lines, which are the credit unions. Next. In the U.S., we have 23 states that have introduced bills of one sort or another for publicly owned banks. Next. And a number of cities and counties are also working on it, making good progress. One is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which just last week, they had already had a feasibility study determining that the bank would be profitable. So now last week, the city council, they now have a resolution was introduced before the city council for forming a city-owned bank. So hopefully that'll proceed. Oakland is doing very well. I think, are you going to talk? Yeah, Susan's going to talk about that. So a number of cities, anyway, are moving on the project. We've been talking about this for at least 6 years as Public Banking Institute, but it just takes time. It's like the grassroots. First, you've got to plant the seeds. I mean, it used to be nobody had ever heard of the Bank of North Dakota, and now it seems like everybody's, or most people have heard of it. They understand the concept. And it is taking hold now. Next. So why have none of these bills passed? We're getting close. In New Jersey, actually, the leading candidate for governor, which would be next year that he would get elected, has public banking in his platform. That's how he's going to fund his programs. And I think the reason he got it and picked up on the idea so quickly was that he was a Goldman Sachs banker. He's a Wall Street banker. So he understood how banking works. And I think that's really our biggest hurdle, is that most people and most legislators, most elected officials don't really understand what they're dealing with or how the whole banking system works. So that's one thing I want to go into. So that they're afraid it's too risky, that we're taking a big risk with our public funds. There's concerns about political corruption. Voters will say, we don't trust government, we don't want more government. And then you also hear elected officials say, we can't afford to lend our revenues, we need our revenues for our budget. But that's a misconception. Banks don't lend their deposits. Next. Recent studies have shown that globally, public banks are actually safer than private banks, and you can tell that from that Sparkassen chart. And they're also less corrupt and less corruptible. This is because they are public institutions that are supposed to be fully transparent, fully accountable. So it's a lot harder to manipulate a public bank than a private bank. And they're, even though they're not trying to be profitable, they're actually more profitable overall than private banks. Next. But the thing that I find really interesting and the biggest hurdle to me and the interesting thing is to convince elected officials that they're not putting their money at risk by putting them in a public bank any more than putting them in a Wall Street bank. In fact, I would say the Wall Street bank is riskier now that we have bailouts and bail-ins and so forth. But I don't have time to go into that. But when you put your money in the bank is not lending out that money. Just like when you put your money in a Wall Street bank, they will lend out 90%, or ideally they would lend out 90% of their deposits. How do they do that? What happens when the depositors come for their money? They actually create the money they lend on their books. And money reformers have been saying that for decades, but and it was considered like conspiracy theory. But in 2014, the Bank of England actually came out and said that in this bombshell report where they said, contrary to popular belief, banks do not lend their deposits. They actually create the money they lend on their books. And that in fact, 90% of the money supply is created in that way. Next. This is also true in the US, as you can see from this chart. The blue line is the money created by a government, which is coins and dollar bills. And you could argue about the dollar bills since they're issued by the Federal Reserve, but giving them the benefit of the doubt and assuming that's actually federal, still you see that's a very small part of the money supply. The red line is the money created by banks as bank credit, and that's virtually our whole money supply. Next. They do it by double entry bookkeeping. So if you go to the bank and you take out a $100,000 mortgage, let's say, assuming there are still houses available for $100,000, and the bank will write it as a liability to itself on one side of its books, because when that check goes to your seller and it goes into another bank, the bank will have to cover it, and they'll write it as an asset to themselves on the other side of the books, because you have agreed to pay that back over time, plus interest, so you'll probably pay back twice as much over time, at least, as the original loan over 30 years. So their books come out to zero. They've got a plus 100 and a minus 100. Next. But when your check that you write on that, they just write that money into your account, $100,000. So that becomes a new deposit in your deposit account. So when you write a check to your seller that goes into another bank, to that bank, that's a new deposit of $100,000 coming into the bank. So that's $100,000 that didn't exist before, that's counted in the money supply because it includes deposit. And that, let's say, hypothetically, so banks are doing this all over the country, all day, every day. They're creating money as loans, and they're extinguishing money when loans are paid off. So money is not what people think. It's not a fixed commodity. It's actually a flow. It's actually a credits and debits being created and destroyed all day long. So let's say another bank creates $100,000 as a mortgage, and that money finds its way into the first bank. So those two banks could basically be exchanging $100,000 checks, both of which were created as deposits on their books. So both banks have 100 coming in, 100 going out, their books balanced. But in the whole system, they have created $200,000 on their books, just as bank credit. Next. And if the bank doesn't have checks coming in that balance the checks going out, the books only have to balance at the end of the day. Nobody worries about, as these checks are flying back and forth all day, nobody worries about whether the books balance. But at the end of the day, they're supposed to balance. If they don't, then the Federal Reserve treats that as an overdraft on the bank's reserve account with the Fed, and then the bank has to cure that deficiency. So what they will do is to borrow overnight they can borrow from each other very cheaply at the Fed funds rate, currently 0.39%. Well, it used to be even lower at 0.25%. Or they can borrow from the money market, which is often even lower than that. So, and then they give the money back the next day, and they do that over and over and over. They borrow, and then they give it back. So every night they borrow it, and then they give it back in the morning. So it's basically sort of this sleight of hand juggling of balls in the air, pretending to have money they don't really have, borrowing it and returning it. So that works really well, except when you have like a credit freeze, because for some reason the money markets decide not to lend, as happened in 2008. Next. So what's wrong with this model? First of all, the growth imperative, the fact that private banks are creating money, a certain amount of money, and always taking back more than they put out, because they're taking back interest along with principal. So you always have debt growing faster than the real economy. So you always have a debt overhang, which is mathematically unsustainable. Ultimately, the whole thing, you have booms and busts and booms and busts, and that's happened for the last 200 years. There's also the fact that private banks are in control of the money, so they determine who gets credit and on what terms. They can make very cheap loans to themselves or their cronies, and they also control how much money is in the system, so they can create depressions effectively, forcing us to take out yet more debt to pay off our loans, because that's the only place you can get money. Debt is good for the banks until everything collapses. And also the fact that the model is quite risky, as we saw with the bailouts, bail-ins, bank runs. So bail-ins is pretty interesting, but I don't have time to go into it. But next, it's a risk that public funds are running right now. Next. So how can we need this credit, we need bank credit to run the economy, because that is where virtually all of our money comes from. So we can't just eliminate this system. So how can we keep this system going while eliminating the risks and returning the profits to the public? And that is by owning our own banks. Next. So this is just my easy example of how one guy sitting in an office could turn a profit overnight just by the magic of leverage, just by taking our own deposits, putting in our own bank, and turning that into credit for the system. So let's say it takes about $20 million to capitalize a bank in California. So let's say you take $20 million from your public pension funds. So this is still public money. They're currently looking for a return of about 7%. They're not getting that, but let's give them that because they're public and we want to help them, so fine. So your cost of funds, cost of capital for a year will be $1.4 million. Then that $20 million at a 10% capital requirement allows you to pull $200 million, or to fund $200 million in assets or loans. So let's say you pull $200 million in deposits. This is your own money. You're the city or the state's own money. You pull it out of JP Morgan or wherever it is now, Wall Street Bank, put it in your own bank, and then say you pay 0.5% interest on this deposit, which is considered a good return for large deposits like that. So your cost of deposits is $1 million annually. So this allows you to lend $200 million less the reserve requirement, which would be $20 million. So that's at a 10% reserve requirement. So you've got $180 million to lend or invest. So let's do the easy thing and just buy bonds with it. So say you bought bonds at 3%, your profit is going to be $5.4 million for the year, less $2.4 million, your cost of funds. So your net profit is going to be $3 million or 15% per year on top of the 7% that you're paying the pension funds. So they're making 7 and you're still making 15. And it's all because of the magic of leverage. So that's what Wall Street banks do, and that's the perk that we want. We want to get that benefit back for the people. Next. But a $20 million bank is considered pretty small, so they don't necessarily lend out 90% of their deposits. So let's say you lend out 70%, you retain 30% in reserve, and you run those numbers again, you still have a 9% return or $1.8 million profit per year, and that's in addition to the 7% you're paying in pension funds, and the 0.5% you're paying on interest. Next. Or, I just wrote an article on this, Proposition 51, which passed yesterday, was a $9 billion bond issue for school construction. And in the voter's guide, it said it was projected that this would take 35 years to pay off at 5%. So the cost of $9 billion times 5% times 35 years is $15.75 billion just in interest. So almost twice as much in interest as the $9 billion that you're getting as principal. So let's do that as a state-owned bank. Let's say, in my article, I was using the pooled money investment account, which is the Treasurer's investment pool of rainy day funds, et cetera, from all over the state. And it's got close to $70 billion in it right now. So, and it, $70 billion earning 0.6% return. So let's say you take $1 billion from the public pension funds, which currently have $500 billion. We have the largest pension funds in the world in California. So $1 billion out of $500 billion, they're not even going to notice if you pull that out. Capitalize your bank, pay them 7%, so that's $70 million a year is your cost of capital. And that allows you to pull to fund $10 billion in assets. So let's say you pull $10 billion out of the pooled money investment account, pay them 0.6% that they're getting now. So that's $60 million is your cost of deposits, or $130 million a year is your total cost of funds. Times 35 is 4.55 billion as opposed to 15.75 billion. So you just saved 11 billion. And if at the end of 35 years you give the pension funds their $1 billion back that they invested, you save $10 billion on a $9 billion loan, doing it through your own state-owned bank. Next. And this is true not just for school construction, but for any sort of infrastructure. On average, it's considered that financing is 50% of the cost of infrastructure. So if you funded it yourself so that you get to keep the interest, then you could cut your cost of infrastructure by 50%, less, minor costs of the bank itself. So for example, the Bay Bridge retrofit was $6 billion principal. By the time it's paid off, it'll be another $6 billion in interest. This is also true for the bullet train, the projected built bullet train. $10 billion was the initial outlay approved by the voters, and by the time they pay interest, it will be another $10 billion. Next. So that's all I have time for, but for more information, these are my websites. ellenbrown.com, I've got over 300 articles on this subject that I wrote myself. And publicbankinginstitute.org, and those are my two books, Public Bank Solution and Web of Debt. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. A lot of word problems. It's complicated, but thank you so much for working the numbers and breaking it down and enlightening us all. Mark Armstrong, comrade. I just want to take a personal moment to say, about 5 years ago, I led a foreclosure on town hall meeting on foreclosures, and at that time, Mark Armstrong was living in the town of Sonoma, and someone said to me, you might want to consider bringing in this guy, Mark Armstrong, to have him speak on public banking, and I was like, I'll give him 5 minutes. What is that? What is this? I never heard of it. I knew nothing about it. And, he's since moved on to the state of Virginia. And I just, once I started to understand the concept, I followed everything that Mark did for the last year. And Ellen, too. Mark led me to Ellen. I've read everything they've written, listened to every radio broadcast, every podcast, every blog, every, teleconference. I just keep following it all. And so, I gave Mark 5 minutes that night, and when he told me he's coming out to California for a family wedding, we just, worked to set all of this up, and now I'm asking him, how long can you stay and how many appointments can I book, and I'll take as long as I can get him now, but he's a dear friend, and we've had so much fun working on this together, and I just really, want to acknowledge all of you guys for taking this time and for all your dedicated hours of work that you do for free just to help make this world a better place for us all. So, Mark was the co-founder and executive director of the Public Banking Institute. He helped form the Postal Banking Coalition in DC 3 years ago and is president of Commonomics USA, a Sonoma-based public policy think tank and educational nonprofit. He worked at IBM Finance in San Francisco and is a graduate of UCLA's Anderson School of Business, and he helped develop the UCLA economic forecasting model for California. Mark Armstrong.
Okay, so I'll be talking primarily about cannabis cash and public banking. Let's go on to the next slide. So this is kind of the agenda. I'm going to start off with talking about the benefits of having a solution like this, what the solution looks like. There's a really important concept, and that is how the people of North Dakota identify, protect, and nurture their economy. Now, we have Sonoma State University here that does an economic forecast for Sonoma County, but have we identified the North Coast 6 counties as an economic region? Are there studies that identify, how to grow the economy in this area? And I know if Santa Rosa is going to be the gateway to this area for this industry, we need to have that knowledge. And so I'm going to go through some examples of how people in North Dakota protect their economy, nurture it, and there are really some good examples of which, and I can draw some contrast with what's done in California. We'll talk a little bit about the city council and some of the issues associated with sources of funds. That's always an issue. Fiduciary responsibilities, and then we'll just wrap it up. So the benefits are as follows. There's a number of short-term benefits. Of course, getting cash out of duffel bags that are in cars going up and down 101. Of course, that issue is going to be addressed, and that's a pretty short-term issue, and there's all sorts of public safety benefits associated with that. There will be a way to increase or turn on, because there is no public credit that's available right now, but turn on the public credit spigot. And I'll get into that later on. But certainly, if Santa Rosa and this area started taxing the industry, there are ways to use a bank to ensure that the taxes are being paid and that they're all being captured to the extent that they should be taxed. What a public bank does is it prioritizes Santa Rosa's public interest as defined by Santa Rosans. So in North Dakota, in the Bank of North Dakota, there are 26 loan programs which are used to steer public credit into sectors of the economy that they want to develop. These 26 loan programs represent the values of North Dakota. And so what it's really important to understand is that the heart of a public bank, and we've been talking about public banking and what it is, but the essence of a public bank are these loan programs. They will steer money to fund technology in an agricultural sector. They will steer money to fund new high-tech startups in another, maybe renewable energy sector. And so these loan programs are really important to direct credit and to where we want to grow the economy, and that reflects the values of the people of that region. And so by doing so, it's a more long-term benefit. You're basically making Santa Rosa the gateway to the North Coast by having this robust ability to develop the economy with public credit. We've all had conversations with each other where we come across a good idea, and it's like, well, that's a great idea. Why don't we do it? And it's like, well, we don't have the money. And we come across that again and again. And they don't do that in North Dakota. If they have a good idea, they use public credit to fund whatever that idea is. And so they still have the constraints that we have, but they have that ability to use their credit to serve the people. So the reason why making Santa Rosa a financial center, a financial gateway is important is because, with the public bank, is because banks have the lowest cost of money. Ellen was just talking about how they write loans into their books, and they literally do that. They write loans into their books, create the deposit that way, and the person walks away with the ability to buy some more solar paneling for their house, or do whatever it may be, but that's a loan which is paid back. I love talking about how money is created. The best analogy I can make is simply just like frequent flyer miles, and let's talk about how frequent flyer miles are destroyed. When you return them back to the issuer, like Delta or United, they don't put them into a vault and put armed guards around them. They simply destroy them. They cancel it. And it's when you issue frequent flyer miles, or when you issue money, which is in the form of a loan, it disappears once it's paid back, once it's returned. And that's my simplest way of explaining how this works. But credit is a very low cost of money. That's what banks do. And we squander our public credit when we take all of our tax deposits, all of our fees, and our CFO or state treasurer puts that money into B of A or Wells Fargo, and that is used to build a coal-fired plant in Chile or another place around the world, instead of directing that public credit back to the community where the money was generated. So this concept of public banking is essential to the economic development of this region. And if Santa Rosa does not embrace public banking, my assertion is that it will cede the gateway because it does not have that banking muscle. What will happen is that the cannabis industry will be commoditized. Wall Street banks will be the financial funders of the development of that industry, and you'll end up destroying the culture of the cannabis culture in this area, because 20 years, 30 years from now, people will end up recognizing that they've paid X amount of interest to Wall Street banks. That interest was extracted out of this economy, and so they go bankrupt or lose their farm, or whatever it may be, their business, and they'll end up, suffering because of the economic model. And that is so. A public bank is a keystone to that. It keeps the interest here and redirects those profits back into the community. So public banking puts the public back into public finance, which has been pretty much completely privatized in our communities. Next, please. So the solution, there are many parts of the solution. The three main things I want to talk about is there certainly is going to be software to ensure bank compliance. For those of us who are looking at the industry, there are banks who have thrown a lot of money paying people to figure out how the bank can become compliant with the Department of Justice guidance memo and other memos that have been issued to make sure that all interests are protected. So compliance is a very large cost, and millions of dollars are being spent on that. There is new technology, there's new software that's out there that a bank can use, and a public bank in this case could use, in order to avoid having to hire a few dozen people to do compliance. The software can actually handle, monitor, and identify some of the issues and issue alerts, and as well as additional information so that the compliance regulations that are in place are completely addressed. But that's only 20% of the solution. And another 20% is getting money off the street. So there's a model that's currently in place, which is just using armed guards, armed vehicles, to pick up money from fast food restaurants, from adult businesses, from any place that's cash intensive. And so that model is already there, and that can be used with the cannabis industry, where that money is picked up, the account for that particular cannabis business is credited, and then that money is put into a vault and taken away. So the person who generated, the business that generated the cash, is going to then have the ability to make payroll, transfer funds, etc. But again, that's only 20% of the solution. The bulk of the solution I'm suggesting is that you're really changing the playing field. You're introducing a new organization, a government organization. In this case, it's a public bank owned by the city of Santa Rosa. And in a sense, you're creating a new dance partner for federal authorities. You're introducing this new organization, which is stepping up to the plate and acting as an umbrella for the cannabis industry. because it would be then saying that it is taking on the burden of compliance associated with banking with cannabis cash and obligating itself to follow the Department of Justice memos and is in communication with the Department of Justice and other federal regulatory agencies in order to make sure that it's up to date, and if there's changes that need to be made to the software or procedures or other operations, that is reviewed with federal authorities beforehand and then implemented. So there are no surprises. Right now there are plenty of surprises in the industry. We've got people knocking on the doors in the middle of the night, and we just need to get away from that as quickly as possible. By having a public bank take the onus upon itself to be the agency, the government agency that is providing compliance, you end up changing the discussion from the heavy hand of government regulating the private sector to it's a government to government type implied partnership. It's not a full partnership, of course, but it's local government engaging the federal government. So it does change the discussion. And I like the idea of dancing with the federal government, so why not? So let's go to the next one. So I've got two slides like this. These bullet points are in no particular order. Each of them requires an attorney to do a level of research associated with what's required. So the charter city of Santa Rosa, it would create a separate organizational corporate entity. So the public bank is not the city of Santa Rosa. The public bank is its own corporation, or possible JPA, but in this case I'm just talking about it being a corporation. There'd be a few bankers who'd be running it. They'd likely be housed in the bullpen area in the finance department for the city. The new organization would likely buy a existing California depository bank, a community bank. It would strip it of its assets, which are the loans, as well as the liabilities, because this is a retail bank that would be likely purchased. What the depository bank should be is a commercial bank, which would then be able to make commercial loans later on. So there's something called a master account, which is essentially a routing number. And if an existing community bank was purchased, then the master account needs to be re-upped. A reapplication needs to be made to the Federal Reserve of San Francisco. Now, this is really important because without this master account, without this routing number, the bank cannot participate in transfer of funds and all sorts of other transactions with other banks. It absolutely needs that. There was a situation last year where a credit union in Colorado applied for a master account, and it was denied by the Federal Reserve of Kansas City. So what I'm suggesting with this set of steps is not to take that route, because you don't want to embarrass the Federal Reserve. They don't want to have to re-decide the same case, and you know how that's going to end up. They're going to say, we already decided this. So what we do is we change the situation. It's a bank that's been in existence. It is a bank. It's not a credit union. It's taking government deposits in addition to cannabis deposits, and it can be self-insured as well. The legal basis for the operations could be set up as a commercial bank, and then a corporate bond could be issued as capital. So the big showstopper here is the Federal Reserve. The big dependency here, I should say, is the Federal Reserve of San Francisco needs to re-up that master account. If that doesn't happen, then this idea is not going to work. But certainly there are elements to this which would be attractive to address some of the issues that we've been talking about. Next. And then finally, the bank would be reconstituted with city and county government deposits from the 6 North Coast counties. There would be the law and guidance memos that have been issued at the federal level would be implemented with procedures as well as the software and compliance software. And then you'd begin operations and accept the cash deposits, and then there'd be continual improvement. But again, what I want to emphasize is that it's shifting the compliance burden back to government. So it's a government-to-government issue as opposed to federal government to the private sector. Next. So this is just a little sketch of what it could look like. You've got the North Coast Counties Bank in Santa Rosa. And Santa Rosa is important because it's a charter county. It's a charter city. As a charter city, it can provide utilities to its people, and issuing credit to the people, it could be viewed as a utility. So it's got the ability to do that within the state of California as guaranteed by the Constitution. And then assuming there are some other state banks or other public banks that are created, best practices could be identified, and there could be a very strong network of public banks providing services to this industry. Next. So now let's talk about North Dakota. Next. So before we get into it, I just want to do a quick comparison. If you look at the population, of course it's a little larger in North Dakota, but Sonoma County is not that far behind. Santa Rosa is certainly more than 2, nearly 3 times as large as Bismarck, which is where Bank of North Dakota is located. Per capita income is very similar. So I'm going to be talking a lot about public credit, and I want to zero in on that number. So Bank of North Dakota has a loan portfolio that's worth $4.3 billion. That is money that is created and put in the hands of its citizens for them to use to develop the economy. So how much public credit does Sonoma County or the city of Santa Rosa or the state of California, for that matter, have that is issued as loans? And the answer is 0. Now we do have a program like Skype, okay, so the Sonoma County Energy Independence Program. It's capped at $60 million, but keep in mind what Skype is. It is government officials taking money, either tax money or borrowing money, and then re-lending it out. And they hit an issue with the cap recently, and so they partnered with some private banks in order to go higher than the $60 million, and those private banks are funding Skype. My point on this is that is not public credit. When you take money from the Federal Home Loan Authority or taxpayers or whoever, another bank, and then reissue that, you're just taking money and reissuing. You're not using the ability to generate public credit like a bank can do, which is what Ellen was reviewing. And the savings are really significant because banks, the cost of credit for a bank is very low. So with the $4.3 billion loan portfolio in North Dakota, they have loan rates that are as low as 1%. And so compare that to Skype, which is what we have here, which is more of a revolving loan fund. That's at 7% or 8% if it's a longer term. I mentioned the 26 loan programs. So essentially what we're doing with Skype is we're taking money that could have been capital for a public bank in Sonoma County, and we're loaning it out. And what North Dakota does is they take money that could be capital for their bank, put it in the bank as capital, and then generate billions of dollars of loans as a result. Because they're just using a different model. So let's go next. So the state-owned North Dakota Mill was started in 1919. It is a public utility, and the reason why it's a public utility is because the farmers in North Dakota did not want to have a monopoly control the grain market. And so they said, it's really important for us to have this mill, have it be owned by the state, and they, as you can see from the numbers, they are continually investing in expanding that. So that mindset is really important. What would happen if here in Santa Rosa, we said, okay, Santa Rosa is going to be a gateway city to the North Coast counties. Guess what's really important as a result of Prop 64? Testing. You've got to know all sorts of things about the cannabis that's being sold. Wonder if Santa Rosa decided to create its version of a state-owned mill, which is a testing lab that's providing low-cost testing services to all growers in the North Coast of California. So you end up with a situation of now this has nothing to do with the public bank, but it has everything to do with recognizing what's important for your economy and not letting Wall Street financed organizations take it over. So you end up building a testing facility that's providing these low-cost testing services, And there's all sorts of opportunities. I know I come from a technology background. When you start getting information about a product, there's all sorts of branding opportunities, etc. Even the testing itself can increase the value of the product. So why not do something like that? Similar, this is not a quaint thing that they do in North Dakota, where it's like, oh, look at those farmers in North Dakota, they have their own mill. No, they're doing it because they want to control their economy, which is what we could do here. Next. So the ham and cheese bill came about because some legislators got the idea that factory farming would be a good idea in North Dakota. In North Dakota in the 30s, they had prohibited outside corporations from owning land in North Dakota to protect the family farmers. So about 3 years ago, some legislators decided they would allow corporations to come in and start doing factory farms. The governor signed off on it. The people this past year said, we don't want that. So they had this proposition number 1, which passed and overturned the ham and cheese bill, so no factory farming in North Dakota. Again, they are protecting their economy because they don't want outside influence. They don't want Wall Street funded corporations to come in and direct it. They want to control it. Next. Rhombus Guy Brewing is a brewing company in Grand Forks. They have a $2 million expansion. It's an SBA loan, so it's about 5 or 6%. But here's what happens when a manufacturer, and a brewer is kind of like a manufacturer, builds out with a large expansion like this. You've got a lot of excess capacity that you don't use for 2, maybe 3 years. So what the Bank of North Dakota said was, you know what, you borrowed all this money in order to fund that expansion, but you're not using what you just built. So we'll give you $100,000 to buy down the interest rate from, I think it was 5 or 6% down to 1 or 2%. It's just an outright grant to buy down that interest rate over the course of the first couple of years. And then the city of Grand Forks put an additional $53K into it. And that's just good business sense. It just makes businesses recognize that that they've got a reason to stick around in North Dakota because their needs are being met. Okay, so, and I'll be right up front. Bank of North Dakota, even though its largest portfolio is for student loans, it does cater significantly to the business community. But now we're talking about student loans. Student loans, what they do is they say, you've got a job, you're 25 years old, you live here in North Dakota, but you have 4 student loans out totaling $60,000. We'll consolidate that and to a low rate of 4.3%, I think it is for this year. And we'll minimize the payment so you're not burdened by that payment. You can afford buying a house. So, Bank of North Dakota does things like that for students, which are really important that you don't see elsewhere in the country. Next. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, can you go back? I do know a brewery here in town here in Santa Rosa, looking for $1.1 million to expand their capacity. They had to go to a bank in North Carolina to get that funding. And again, is the government of Santa Rosa, helping the business community to the extent that the state legislature in Bank of North Dakota is doing in North Dakota. We can do much better than having our business people having to go 3,000 miles away to get a loan like this. So go ahead. Private companies in western North Dakota were transferring water for the oil fields and ripping up the highways. And so the North Dakotans decided to create a new water authority, put in a water pipeline. There was a contentious issue because the private water company wanted to keep using the existing infrastructure and make a buck. They lost. The new public utility providing water to that part of North Dakota won. And so this new public option has been created in the state of North Dakota by the Republicans in North Dakota. It kind of makes your mind explode, but they have these discussions about what's best for the community, what's best for the economy. And obviously a water pipeline is better than having trucks, block traffic and rip up the road. And so that's what the decision was. And Bank of North Dakota funded that to the tune of $50 million. I'm going to skip this. Let's go. Emergency funding in 1997. The Bank of North Dakota gave a 6-month moratorium to all mortgages as well as student loans being paid for anybody who was within the flood zone of Grand Forks, North Dakota. And they bridged funding until FEMA reimbursements. And they did all this within a 2-week time period after the flood. Next. So the question then is, if an earthquake happened here, can the public bank, which doesn't exist, but can the public bank of Santa Rosa turn around and have a moratorium on student loan payments, on home mortgages, etc.? Just think about what that would be like here in this part of California. Infrastructure lending, in this case this was for a $15 million 30-year term new waterworks in Grand Forks, 2% per year. Same terms were provided for housing in this relatively small town, but all the public facilities within the housing development, the streets, the curbs, the sidewalks, all that needed to be funded. They issued a loan, again at 2% per annum. 2% per annum for upwards to 30 years is unheard of, and yet they're doing that because they have a public bank. They don't take bonuses, they don't pay shareholders, and they pass on the savings to people who are using this money. Go ahead. So this next year, we're going to be doing weekly examples. There are plenty of these examples out there. There are different sources of revenues. It's tax and fee revenue, you quote a bond, you sell assets. The state of California sold their state house and they're leasing it back. The state of Indiana sold I-80, which was an infrastructure project during the 50s under Eisenhower. They sold I-80, and now they're leasing that back. Chicago sold its parking infrastructure and to a Goldman Sachs consortium and are leasing it back. This happens again and again and again. You sell assets in order to get the money that you need to pay for different things. And most egregious is probably raiding the pots of money that have been set aside for transportation or whatever. But these are the narrow sets of alternatives that are in the headlines every other day. What North Dakota does is they have the same set of issues, but they also use their public credit. How much is that? $4.3 billion. They use that in order to fund the examples that I just went through, housing infrastructure, transportation, etc. So they just have another way to direct, nurture, and protect their environment and to ensure that it's not co-opted by Wall Street interests. So next, please. Yes, so I just talked about this, but they have a public bank in order to capture that public credit and use it. Next one, and then I think we're done. Oh, 2 more. A real concern, any elected official is concerned about risk, liquidity, and return with regards to investments. I just want to say a couple things on this, and I'm just touching on it, but Bank of North Dakota has lower credit write-offs. Less than half of what the community bankers in North Dakota have. So they have a very conservative lending profile, is what I'm trying to say. They don't take risks. And most interestingly is when they make credit decisions, when they work with, when they issue loans, it's always across the table. It's not over the internet. They don't do this online lending. It's across the table, face to face, and that reduces the risk significantly. It has its own debt, so it has more options, and BND's been profitable every year since 1972. Ellen talked about the Oakland Bay Bridge. Next. So the one big point I want to make about this is if there was a public bank formed as a corporation, the corporation can be 100% owned by a public entity, but the funding can come from issuing a corporate bond. Corporations issue bonds all the time. And so this would be called debt equity, which would be used to fund the public bank. This is not using taxpayer money, it's using just money that could be in the cannabis industry or elsewhere from people who want to buy these bonds, but ownership would be retained by the city. I'm running out of time, why don't you go ahead. And then finally, the summary, go ahead next. Again, it's a implied partnership between the local government as well as federal government, shifting the compliance next, the shifting the compliance back to government. We've talked about the benefits, and I think there's one more. Yeah, for more contact for any one of us, this is it. Thank you very much.
Wow. I think you're brilliant, Mark, and he can weave a tale, you know? It's just amazing to me how he can really grasp all these very broad concepts and break it down into really practical, understandable solutions for us about how we can truly go about this and prosper greatly as a community and be a model. And I know that we pride ourselves on this as a county being a model to the nation in so many ways, and this is just one more huge step that I really hope to champion moving forward. So before we go on to Q&A, oh look at you. They're royal, aren't they? Cute. Oh my gosh. So before we start the Q&A, just quickly, I'm going to have Susan Harmon come up. She's been involved with Mark and Ellen and the Public Banking Institute from the get-go. She lives in Oakland and is championing the public banking movement there. They're way ahead of us, so they're helping to model. She's just going to give a quick update on where they stand in Oakland right now.
Well, Shelley just said that Santa Rosa is the leader, but we're going to try, Oakland is going to try to beat Santa Rosa to the punch on this one. We're in a friendly competition to see who gets the first, who starts the first public bank in California. Where we are in Oakland right now is that after years and years and years of talking to public officials and community members, suddenly we have a resolution before the City Council coming up next Tuesday to begin this process. It's going to be baby steps, and as hard as we're pushing, the city is trying to be conservative and cautious. So this will be just the very first beginning of a feasibility and implementation study towards starting a public bank. And that's as much news as I can tell you right now. Tuesday is coming soon. We're lobbying hard, and Shelley and I are in close touch and in competition to see who does this first. Thank you.
I don't know if I'm competing. I just hope we both get there soon. Okay, so Jeff, where's my buddy Jeff? I hired him to hold on to the cordless mic. I think it was on your chair, Ellen. Yeah, you got it. So he'll come around if you guys have a question or comment. And feel free to raise your hand, and Jeff will come to you. Okay.
I think it's on. Careful.
Ellen, you mentioned pension funds as a way of capitalizing the banks. The Social Security Trust Fund is expected to peak at $3 trillion in 2020, which is $9,000 per person. If we were to disperse that, it's not getting anywhere near 7%, but it could be a way of capitalizing on a network of public banks throughout the country, and it would get Trump out of the fix that he's promised that he will continue to fund Social Security without raising payroll taxes, which we all know is impossible, but we could do it, and it would give us that basis that equalizes the amount of capitalization for every community, rich or poor.
That's a great idea. Of course, the Social Security Fund is better off, so the idea of a public bank is you're putting, like with the state bank, you're putting your state funds in it, including your state pension fund, right?
Right, they can disperse it though, and even though that amount we all know has already been spent, they can recreate it with $3 trillion coins, the way that Paul Krugman has talked about.
Paul Krugman, I think, talked about it as very dimly, agreed.
Other questions?
Thanks for a great presentation. It sounds to me like this has immense potential for the city of Santa Rosa and Sonoma County and the whole North Coast. I'm curious what outreach you've undertaken thus far, in particular with officials from the city of Santa Rosa, to get their buy-in on it. And we happen to have one here who might be interested in commenting on whether he thinks it's a good idea.
Me? You want me to say that? Me answer? Okay. Well, our Chief Financial Officer of the City of Santa Rosa is Debbie Lochner, a very brilliant woman. And, we let, everyone was invited. I invited everyone to this event that is in office in Sonoma County, on the board in every town and city, and those in the running in Santa Rosa and in Cloverdale. Some of you may know it passed on the ballot to begin taxing cannabis, I believe at 10% on sales, and we're going to allow dispensaries. So they were invited as well. So we let everybody know in advance that we were doing this. It's not our intention to sneak up with these ideas. So we sent an offer to Debbie Lochner to meet with us, and she agreed, and she met with me and Mark on Monday, and she was very cordial and very inquisitive and had a lot of questions about it, and is definitely interested in learning. And the thing is, I mean, when you see Mark spell out these solutions, it's just like once people understand it, it's kind of just like a no-brainer. So I mean, from the get-go, when Mark and I started on this, I said, the success of this campaign is going to have everything to do with how well we do at educating people. Because when they understand the concept, I think things can happen. And Debbie is definitely open to dialoguing with us on it. And I've put it out to all the council members and the new ones, and I'll just, continue plugging. And we're hoping that, the community will support us and back us in it as well. Okay. Next. Greg Litwin.
Craig Litwin from Sebastopol. So what do the non-chartered cities do? Are there options for them? And can the schools, the universities, like the junior college and others, do similar things?
So the California State Constitution has a prohibition in place that states that public credit cannot be lent, and so there's a question as to what that means. But I think what was intended, Ellen and I were just talking about it the other day, is that basically the state cannot guarantee private loans, and so. But I'm not sure, this is another question for attorneys, I don't know if that was ever litigated. I don't think there's any, I'll give it to an attorney.
No, I don't think it was ever litigated. So we have an infrastructure bank which lends the credit of the state, and it says so right on the website. So obviously, public entities make loans all the time. So what does this mean? They can't lend their credit. Those provisions were put into state constitutions. I think ours was put in 1849, something like that. So what it meant then, if you trace back the legislative history, was that you couldn't create bills of credit which were actually creating money. It goes back to the Constitution, where the states gave up the power to issue their own money to the federal government, which in fact did not take that power. They delegated they left it open, and that's why the private banks took it over by issuing their own bank notes. But it really has nothing to do with setting up a bank. And there have been other instances besides the Bank of North Dakota, public banks that have been set up and that have lent their own credit, and nobody's challenged it under those provisions.
Other questions, comments? Gary Wasaki.
I'll respond to the request for what is the city actually doing. I
council every 2 years, we have council goals for each term, and this term is just ending right now, so next council, which I will not be a part of, will have their goals in January. The limitation is what our staff can process, and the top goal for this past 2 years has been housing and homelessness. I was successful in getting cannabis zoning on there considered as well, and that's what we have really pushed. I do think that there are some benefits locally, as was outlined here. The key from our speakers is that stood out to me is getting an account for the Federal Reserve. And we don't have that, we haven't done that. It would have to be a priority of staff to do some research. I would encourage all of you, every single one of you, to talk to the council members that are going to be convening in January for their goal session. And that's where you can get the timing's perfect for this. Again, I didn't run for re-election, so don't direct them to me. But
Which council members do you think would be most approachable?
Well, if you look at the addressing public safety issue, you've heard a lot about our council being contentious. That's the one where I actually got the buy-in from every single colleague. I went around and said, why aren't we doing this because of this? And they all agree. And so that's easy. So I won't answer that. I think they'd all be open to it. It's whether they can be convinced to follow it. But it's, you know, it's like everything else. Its potential could be a blessing or a curse. I happen to think that it could be a blessing for this area for economic reasons as were outlined here. But again, it's going to take staff time. It's going to take political will, and that usually comes from public pressure.
Thank you very much. Makes a village. Right, other questions? Like
Hey, I just had a question about the Federal Reserve of San Francisco, how we get them to play with us. You said that was the key issue. And since it didn't work in Kansas City, why would it work here?
So what did not work in Kansas City is that was a brand new credit union that was applying for a new master account number. And that was a privately owned credit union by its members, of course. But what's different is this would be a publicly owned institution owned by the city of Santa Rosa. It would have government deposits in it and a business plan that would look very different from the credit union business plan because it would involve lending to commercial businesses in this area to develop this industry. And so, as well as other industries. And so, because there'd be so many distinct differences like that, it would be a completely different case, you know, and most important of which, this would be for a bank, not for a credit union. So.
Hi, Tess. Good friend, Tess here.
I know this may sound like a really stupid question.
Wait for the mic, please.
Whenever I ask stupid questions, I always think there's got to be other people who are thinking the same thing somewhere. So could you just answer, if you did a public bank, what would be the fundamental steps that you would take to make it happen? Like first step, second step, third step, so that I can get a better vision of actually what you're thinking about. Is that too much to ask?
No, I can take a stab at that. So the 2 pages of bullets that I went through in terms of what needs to be researched, essentially, that's for the most part legal research that needs to take place because public policy needs to be identified and a way forward to navigate through the issues that are identified needs to be identified. And so that's probably the very first step is this effort, this legal research effort that has a lot to do with public policy. It may have to do with state law, and out of that will come a better understanding as to what decisions need to be made.
Yeah, I think all those steps need to be taken, and maybe the Public Banking Institute can help by providing technical assistance or linking up the public officials that are interested in developing this idea by conducting feasibility studies with the professionals who can give them the feasibility study so that they can see that it's a no-brainer. Because I think as we all who have listened to these presentations, it makes sense. It's so obvious, but it's a type of self-evident insight that is only self-evident after you have your awakening. So we got to share the awakening.
I've talked to a lot of elected officials, and like when they hear it from me, like they give it the nod. They think it's a good idea, but they do want to hear it from legislative attorneys and people that have set up banks before, bankers, etc. Like they want a team of experts so that it'll cover their risk, or whatever the lesson plate word is. So that they want to keep their jobs, and they don't want to lose a lot of money. So they want to make sure they're not going to get criticized for this. And for that, they need a team that the rest of the legislature is going to accept their opinion. And that takes money, and so that's something we haven't really been able to do, but we're working on it. That's what we want to do. We do have some volunteer attorneys, volunteer bankers, etc., who are willing to work on this.
I saw you too. We'll get you next, but right, oh, okay. You're pointing to someone else? Is that what you're doing, Dave? It's not you? Dave Ransom? You're pointing to someone else. You can have your hand raised. Yeah, that's who I was, that's who I was saying too, please. So right here, go ahead. Thanks, Dave.
Hi, I have two questions. My first is around insurance. You mentioned that the entity would be self-insured. Can you explain how that would work?
So right now, the FDIC insures bank deposits. But most of us have a consumer perspective on this, and we're talking about deposits that could be covered by the FDIC cap, which is 250,000 or more. Okay, 250,000. That's the ceiling. So when we're talking about a public bank for any government institution, we're talking about lots of zeros. I mean, the $250,000 is nothing compared to the amount of deposits that would be in this bank by single depository. So whether it's the county of Sonoma or the county of Mendocino, we're talking about a lot of money that would not be covered by FDIC insurance. And this would not be a retail bank, so there's no need for FDIC insurance. There has to be another way to insure those funds, and so I'm just talking about self-insurance, which is what the Bank of North Dakota does.
I imagine that many people here would be interested in throwing a little capital toward the effort to start it up. Is there any movement toward actually funding some research? I mean, $50,000 or $100,000, I think, can be drummed up in a room like this pretty quickly.
Okay, pass that hat again, please.
And turn it into equity, in the entity, so.
Yeah, well, we are working on it, but I think it takes a fair chunk of money. Yeah.
What's a fair chunk?
Well, attorneys are what, $150 an hour, and we need experts who actually. I know of a law firm that sets up banks. I would like to get their advice, but they charge attorney rates, so that's what I'm saying. It takes.
I mean, have you worked up a budget so that we would have an achievable goal and a timeline so that we could get there within a year?
No, but that's a good idea.
Some of you may know Tom Seguros, who he was a senior analyst for the treasurer of the state of Rhode Island, and he is a consultant. He's written a book on banking. I think I've given that to a few people here, and we work with him. He already has a plan as to how to do that, and the price on that is less than $100,000.
And is a year realistic?
I would say it'd be more like 6 months. We're talking about 6 months to identify the path forward, and then the decisions need to be made.
Because it seems
it's important to me that we move fast because Wall Street's gonna just take over this whole business if we're not.
Yeah,
Fast.
exactly, yeah.
Mark, do you want to say anything to what they did in Santa Fe, the feasibility study that was 50,000 and paid for by the city, correct? As I remember, you know?
I don't know the price. I know that the original feasibility studies, the first one was 25,000, and then the follow-ups were 5,000 that were copying the first 25,000, so it doesn't even have to be 50.
Okay, so hang on,
So
let's,
we need to go fund me.
Matt, yes. Oh, let me write that down. Okay, let's stay on the mic. Okay, please raise your hand. I appreciate all your comments.
It's about this.
With the current status of cannabis in federal government, if we deposited cash in a public bank, wouldn't we still be exposed or more exposed for federal seizure, being that I'm assuming you still have the same currency transaction reports and bank
Right.
secrecy act?
So the issue, it's a compliance issue, and the issue has to do with the ability for there to be proof that the compliance as stated by the Department of Justice and other federal authorities, that those guidance memos and other laws are being fulfilled. And so the Bank of Santa Rosa, for instance, would be engaged with the Department of Justice to make sure that the software that's being used, and let's say there are limits in terms of what's being flagged, etc., that all that is compliant with what the DOJ has written. So to answer your question, the whole idea is to put in place this conversation with federal authorities so this umbrella of protection is created out of that conversation with technology which enables the procedures that need to be put in place so that people who are depositing cannabis cash can have confidence that it is no longer considered to be drug money, that is accepted legitimately by the banking system because of the procedures that have been put in place.
And I would add that this is all assuming that the Trump administration continues the same enforcement policies that the Obama administration has followed, and that they don't revoke or alter their Treasury guidance or their DOJ memos.
Okay, Susan, did you want to add something?
I just wanted to say that there's a possibility of Oakland and Santa Rosa splitting the cost of the implementation studies. Possibility.
Not a 2-for-1, but buy 2 get a reduction. So, Yara.
First of all, thank you guys so much. Weeknight in the dark, coming up here, talk to us. Really appreciate it. I haven't had the benefit of reading your book yet, and I'm sure this is probably already answered on page whatever. But I'm looking at the ratios, and I hear people talking about feasibility studies and costs, but there's already proof of concept. So it doesn't seem like it's about the cost of reinventing the wheel or implementing it in other areas. What I don't see in the ratio is how do you overcome asset forfeiture, which isn't up there in terms of what the benefit is to some interest groups, as well as when you talk about the difference on, say, a $6 billion bond, and instead of paying another $6 billion in interest rates, what that means, and I'm not talking about the creation of wealth, but what that means is that $6 billion in interest, you took that out of somebody else's pocket. Now you might have put it back in the public's pocket, or you might have done something that creates a benefit, but you created a different winner and a different loser. And I think we would all agree in this room that the winner is spread out over more people who probably need that benefit. But when you take that money and you take it out of those interest groups' pocket, how on the 20% here and the 20% there and the 60% there, how do you overcome that?
No, you don't take it out of somebody's pocket. That's the whole point of leveraging credit. So instead of, effectively, you're paying the interest to yourself. Let's say the government owed $6 billion on the, say $6 billion in interest. if the government owns the bank, they're paying that interest back to themselves, right? So it's a wash. It comes out to zero.
Currently, we have private enterprise banks that make that money.
Right.
This is a town that was built on banking money. Annandale was bought by, deeply ingrained families in the fabric of Sonoma County. So when we talk about taking that money back and putting it into a public or quasi-private public institution, you're taking revenue away from the current status quo. And so I see the 60-20-20, but what I don't see is how do you wrestle that away from the institutions like banks and lobbyists that work for banks in the financial services industry? How do you get that money back?
Right, so the commercial loans that Bank of North Dakota does, I'm just going to use that as a model because that's real, those are all participation loans. So those are loans that the smaller community banks put money into as well. They use their credit to fund those loans as well. So they're not working in competition with one another. And the reason why is because a lot of community banks hit their legal lending limit. Let's say they hit their legal lending limit at $5 million. They have a customer, let's say they have a car dealership that needs to buy $15 million of new property and cars and new building, whatnot. So before Bank of North Dakota started engaging them with these participation loans, they'd have to go to Wells Fargo or B of A in order to fund the delta. And what would happen, because of cross-selling, Wells Fargo does that, Wells Fargo would poach the customer. So now what Bank of North Dakota does is fund the delta, the $10 million in this case. The community bank would put in 5. And the Bank of North Dakota services the loan by doing all the administrative work with it. And everybody's happy because everybody gets a piece of the pie and the customer stays a customer of that community bank. So there's absolutely no diversion, there's no competition between the Bank of North Dakota and community banks. It's all done in partnership. And I would envision that happening here as well.
And also you're allowing loans to be made that otherwise just wouldn't be made. I mean, there are plenty of businesses that are complaining that they can't get credit. And so you could expand your credit base to include that. And if it's the Wall Street banks that you're taking business away from, that's what we wanted to do. That's the goal here. They're out-of-state banks.
Other questions?
As the lady said, these are revolutionary times. And this guy is absolutely right. Today, I suppose the recipient of the Old Timers We Have the Money group is the first community bank that is not Community First Bank of the Gallaghers and Doug Bosco. Right? Okay. And so it does come down to, when you think about where did that bank come from in 1919? Somebody's good idea? No, it came out of a long period of organizing of small farmers. Are y'all small farmers? Right? You have to organize so the Constellation Brands doesn't come in here and buy up the pot farms the way they bought up the wine. Right? Okay. Now, they had allies. I'm here for housing. What struck me today was, 2% loans for housing. We're both from a housing group at a Methodist church, and our interest, we've come to this point. We started talking about public banking, a year and a half ago? Right. Okay, because if we're going to use public money to build housing so that we can live here, we don't want to pay Doug Bosco or Wells Fargo to do it. And so we want a bank too. So you got allies. I hope that you guys are going to send out to everybody, you got a list of the email list, and say, let's put together a working group so we can answer the questions that have come up. I heard a woman say, I got $150,000. Okay, if she's got that, then let's use that money to get the stuff answered quick so that we can get moving, because the housing movement in this county is ready for it. We just elected 3 out of 4 folks to the city council here, and the reason we didn't get the 4th is we didn't have a 4th candidate. That's the only reason. A question. I'm supposed to ask a question, and the question is, what is the plan for keeping the energy in this room and taking it a step further?
So yes, if you have not contacted us by email, or if you know we don't have your email address, just go to publicbanking.org, put your name down there, and we will form a list that we'll send out. Or give us your business card. There's a sign-up sheet for emails as well. But what's going to happen is there'll be this Public Banking Works campaign. Will start in January. It will be a weekly email shot of case studies coming from Germany, where the different public banks are working for the benefit of the people, as well as from North Dakota. So we're trying to arm people with information and education so that they can have discussions with public officials, and I think working groups and other things will come out of that.
Well, could we just sign up for working groups here?
What do we need?
Taco Shelley.
Victoria had her hand up.
Hello, so I do want to thank you for giving us a great framework to tackle this issue and kind of get our hands in this industry and get control before Wall Street does. I heard a lot about the economic implications on how this can help the community and the county, and I'm kind of wondering, what about the social implications that would come from this plan? Do you guys have any visions on how this would help low-income communities, or how, just the benefits would keep kind of going on to low-income people of color and, the housing crisis?
So I purposely put up the housing infrastructure slide because that was a housing development that needed low-cost infrastructure in order for it to pencil out. And so there are different services, and we'll have case studies on senior housing as well as other things that are being funded by the Bank of North Dakota. So that's probably the best answer I can give you. I mean, it's a bank, so it doesn't provide social services that we all might be familiar with. It just provides loans which are at a low interest rate that are targeted to help people in the community, and that would be people throughout the community. And so that's really, that decision is going to be made by you all in engagement with the loan officers of the Bank of Santa Rosa.
You can also put that in your enabling legislation, what you want these loans to be made for, and who gets particularly low interest loans.
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I lived in Boulder, Colorado for 30 years, and I moved out a couple years ago, probably a year before marijuana became legal as a recreational drug in Colorado. Colorado has changed dramatically in the last 4 years. It's almost unrecognizable. Every corner of Denver is being developed. The housing market has exploded. The rental market's amazing. It's amazingly competitive. And I think as much as looking at North Dakota and how they banked and how they worked with their community, to look at, in particular, Washington State and Colorado, look at how the legalization of marijuana affected those economies. And, they both had different protocols for how they legalized marijuana. Personally, I think Colorado's was better. And to see the whole impact on the infrastructure of the economy in Colorado and have models for that, because I'm hearing in this room people saying, we want to organize now. We want to get this thing moving now, because we know that this is a fast storm coming to hit California. And if we're not ahead of that storm coming, it will get hijacked by corporate America. So I'm in agreement that whatever the research is that will help our elected officials and help our businesses understand how they can participate and how it will be beneficial to them. That kind of order and that kind of clear direction can help a lot in staying in front of the tide.
So, I'm very happy, pleasantly surprised that people want to get engaged with this. I mean, Ellen and I have been in the wilderness for a long time. So I will be happy to help lead a legal research working group. You know, I live in Virginia, but I can do conference calls with people. So just talk with me afterwards. What we need to do is put together a list of legal issues that need to be addressed. There needs to be an attorney to do the research in these areas and develop a plan so that it can be presented to the people who need to make the decision. So that's really the next step. So just talk with me or send me an email, Mark, M-A-R-C, at commonomicsusa.org. I think that screen was up earlier. Or just give me your card.
And as a local attorney, I volunteer to help spearhead that effort, but we're going to need more technical assistance. And hopefully more people can step up who have legal or banking experience or want to help with this novel effort.
I just want to say we have scheduled this to end at 8 p.m., so I'd like to just allow for one or two more questions and we wrap this up. We're paying for them by the hour. Technically, we're supposed to be out by 8:30. I'm willing to, let it float a little beyond, but we do need to work to wrap it up. Sure, yeah, she's starting a list of people that want to be on the working group. Yeah, thank you. Other questions or comments? Orange, well,
we did have a local working group, and we built a document that we got in front of Jeff Cyphers at Sonoma Clean Power, and he wasn't able to integrate it into his programs. But a couple weeks ago, there's a new economic development district, a Sonoma-Mendocino Economic Development District. I got involved with some of the plan writing for that. And so we submitted public banking as an economic development driver for that program. And it made it to the docket, but it didn't get involved in the official program. But the reason I mention it is because the concept is getting out. And it is getting out in the economic development community of our county and Mendocino County. And so there, as you go forth, you'll find people that are aware of the topic. And we do have a draft document that we put out that I'd be happy to share with anybody here. That just kind of lays out in a page and a half what a public bank could do. And this was a public bank not built on the cannabis community, but built on the success of Sonoma Clean Power. And so we'll be happy to join another working group and build from that. I don't really have a question.
Any final comment?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming, for your interest, for your support. I really appreciate you there. Thank you. Mark Armstrong, Brown, Mark, KPFA.